And good morning. We welcome in Pat McGuigan again on a Saturday morning. And Pat, a couple of heady topics to take up this morning, and big topics at the Capitol this week. This week we saw the return of Muslim Sharia law as an issue of discussion here in Oklahoma. The House passed a law banning the use of foreign law in state courts. Is this something that's going to be upheld in our courts, given the situation with the state question that was passed?
Yeah, I guess I'd make an analogy to abortion law in this sense. Requiring informed consent is different than banning the exercise or practice of abortion completely. This presents a new set of questions potentially to the courts if it's ever enacted into law. It's House Bill 1552. It passed 76-3 in the House. And you have to remember that the previous law, the one now being held in abeyance, passed with 70% support. So you're not talking about something outside the mainstream of Oklahoma politics. Real quickly, and it's going to the Senate now. We'll see what the senators do. CARE, Council of American Islamic Relations, is encouraging senators to vote no. Advocates of the previous law are encouraging people to vote yes in the Senate on this bill. But it's not quite the same question. This is neutral. It's applied to all foreign laws equally, foreign-based laws. Now, the old law made explicit reference to Sharia. This doesn't. And I think that's a distinction. CARE would argue that it's a distinction without a difference. But it presents a different question potentially to the courts if it's enacted. The issue is not, it's one where you get torn by respect or affection, for some of the individuals involved. But I'll just try to state it neutrally. The basis of concern is that in places like London, where there were no Sharia courts 50 years ago, there's now, I believe, 85. At least the last time I did detailed reporting on this, which was last year, there were 85 Sharia courts. When I was in London, my wife and I were there at Easter 2010. This is ancient history. And at Parliament Square, there were demonstrations raging back and forth on a lot of different issues, including the implementation of Sharia law and aspects of British law. So it's not theoretical.
It's happened there. The argument, it could happen.
Yeah, no, we have a written constitution rather than common law, which is the development slowly of precedential law, if you will. So maybe that's a difference. When you know people like Imad Inchasi, and you have professional respect for a man like Munir Awad, and those are individuals arguing against this, you have some tug of the heart when you hear them criticizing the law and feeling like it's an attack on Islam. But the law that passed the other day, I believe the motivation is not about them, and it's not about Sally Kern, who was the sponsor of this measure. It's about American law. And ultimately that'll get worked out in American courts, and a decision will be made on whether or not, you have to understand that as high level as the Supreme Court, there are people who advocate using international law beyond just treaties, which are binding agreements, and then there are people that oppose using international law in domestic situations. So I don't know how it'll turn out. I think it's the start of a different discussion, but an important discussion that has echoes of the previous one.
Yesterday was Wednesday was the anniversary of the Obamacare, as most people here in Oklahoma refer to it, and the governor used that as an occasion to address lawmakers and to push for passage of the creation of an Oklahoma health care exchange.
Yes.
Where is this going to go? I mean, and how is this different than what Obamacare proposes?
Yeah, I actually have Governor Fallon's letter that went to every lawmaker making the case. It's very interesting, you use the term Obamacare, which has now become universal. Even Senator Rice, the leader of the Democrats in the Senate, uses the term on occasion. So for good or ill, this is Obama's law. Now, real quickly, the health care exchanges are required under the federal act, the Affordable Health Care Act. And technically, all that House Bill 2130, which was a big argument last week in the legislature, and which Fallon has now endorsed as it goes to the Senate, In theory, all the argument was about was whether or not to create the board that's required of Health Care for Uninsured Board, HUB, H-U-B. But of course, it becomes laden with all the background issues and the fact that a $54 million grant is behind this. And the argument that some conservatives have made is that let's don't buy into Obamacare at all, or let's do a less expensive and more efficient version of the exchange, do the bare minimum, or wait and see how things turn out. There's some risk to that because then in the fall the ruling could come down that this is constitutional, the U.S. Supreme Court, and then you're behind the curve. Now, on the flip side, there's proposals being made for health care compact among citizens, among voluntary associations and groups, and among states that would accomplish many of the laudable purposes that people say are behind Obamacare, to use the term again, but compacts would be voluntary and they would be holistic, emerging from the states rather than imposed from the top down. That's the argument that's made for those. And you could create exchange-like mechanisms that would not violate the idea of healthcare compacts and voluntarism, but would that pass the muster of the federal law if it's upheld? I don't know. I will just say that this is going to be a pretty big issue. I think that Fallon's letter has the potential to be a game changer and end the arguments among conservative Republicans, but maybe not. The feelings are pretty strong about not accepting, any way, shape, or form, this particular expansion of federal power.
Well, this will come to a head pretty soon, I guess.
Yeah, it's a key policy question for Oklahoma.
All right, Pat, thanks very much. We appreciate it. You can read more about these and other topics at CapitolBeatOK.com. We'll see you next week.